The twin suns were high in the sky, casting a golden light over the crowded market street. Dust rose under the footsteps of merchants and soldiers, the air heavy with heat and tension. In the center of it all, a young alien woman was forced forward, her wrists bound with chains that clinked with every step. She kept her head low, but her long silver hair caught the sunlight, making her stand out like a shard of light among shadows. Whispers spread through the crowd as more people gathered. Some threw bits of dried leaves, others muttered cruel words. Under their breath, she had the ears of her people, tall and sharp, and her green eyes flashed every time someone jeered at her. They called her a traitor, a coward, and worse. Her thin leather clothing was torn in places, the result of a rough capture. But even surrounded by hate, she walked with a slow, controlled pace, as if she refused to let them see her break. On both sides of the street, armed guards made a wall of steel. Their alien armor was carved with jagged lines, designed to intimidate. They did not touch her, but they made sure she had no way out. The crowd's voices rose louder with every step she took. People who had once cheered her name now spat on the ground as she passed. Somewhere above the noise, a merchant laughed cruelly, calling her nothing but a failed daughter of a failed family. She had been a commander once, young yet brilliant, leading patrols along the border worlds. The war that came was not her fault, but the blame had fallen on her anyway. Her forces were outnumbered, her allies unreliable. And when the enemy broke through, the rulers needed someone to take the shame. Her name was stripped from the records of honor, her medals taken, and now she was paraded here for all to see, as if humiliation could erase the truth. Among the sea of alien faces, there was one figure that stood out. A human man, taller than most, stood near the edge of the crowd. His clothing was dusty from travel, and his eyes followed her with a quiet intensity. Unlike the others, he did not shout or jeer. His gaze was calm, steady, and filled with something she had not seen in days understanding. She noticed him, only for a moment, before looking away, afraid to hope for anything from a stranger. The guards pushed her forward until she stumbled, her knees hitting the ground. The sound of chains clinking against stone was sharp in the heavy air. Laughter rippled through the onlookers. A child threw a small stone, hitting her shoulder, and the crowd roared with cruel approval. Her hands tightened into fists, but she stayed silent. Every part of her body screamed for her to fight, but she had no weapon, no allies, and no chance. The taste of dust and shame filled her mouth. The human's hands clenched at his sides. He had seen war before, seen cruelty in many forms, but this was different. There was no justice here, only the easy entertainment of breaking someone already wounded. He watched as a group of young soldiers stepped closer to her, their mocking voices turning into threats. One of them reached out and pulled her head up by the hair, forcing her to meet the crowd's gaze. Her eyes burned with defiance, but her chains kept her still. Something in the human shifted then, a quiet decision hardening into action. He stepped away from the shadow of the buildings and into the center of the street. The crowd noticed him at once, their jeers pausing for a heartbeat. The guards turned their heads, surprised by his boldness. Dust swirled around his boots as he walked toward her. She looked up at him, confusion and warning in her eyes. He stopped just a step away, his shadow falling over her, and the air between them seemed to change. The crowd shifted uneasily as the human stood before her. His sudden movement had broken the rhythm of their cruelty. Some whispered to each other, wondering if he was a soldier or a fool. The guards watched with narrowed eyes, unsure whether to step in or wait for orders. She kept her head tilted just enough to see him, her chest rising and falling with slow, controlled breaths. It was the first time in days someone had stood between her and her humiliation. He didn't speak at first. His presence alone seemed to press against the mood of the crowd. Dust swirled lazily around them, the heat making the air shimmer. The human's jaw was tight, His eyes locked on the guards. One of the soldiers sneered and told him to move aside, warning him that this was not his fight. The man didn't budge. His shadow stayed over her, blocking the harsh sunlight from her face. The alien woman studied him in silence. His clothing was worn but strong, built for travel across rough lands. There was a small scar near his jawline, the kind that came from surviving more than one fight. His hands were steady, his posture unyielding. She could sense he was not the kind to act without reason. For a moment, she wondered if he knew who she was, or if he was simply acting on instinct. Either way, it was dangerous for him to stand. There, the guards moved in closer, their weapons low but ready. One barked an order for the human to leave. The crowd's noise grew sharper, sensing a new kind of entertainment. The man's voice finally broke the silence, calm but carrying through the street. He told them that this wasn't justice. He told them that shaming someone like this was the act of cowards. The words cut through the heat and noise, making the guards stiffen. The alien woman's eyes widened slightly at his boldness. One of the younger guards stepped forward, smirking as he asked if the human was willing to take her place. The suggestion brought laughter from the crowd. The man didn't laugh. Instead, he stepped even closer to her, close enough for her to see the sweat on his brow. He told the guard that if they wanted to break someone, they would have to try breaking him first. The street fell into a tense hush at his challenge. She felt the weight of the moment. This stranger was risking himself for her in a way no one else had dared. The guards exchanged quick glances, unsure if this was worth escalating. The leader of the patrol, an older alien with cold eyes, finally raised his hand. The younger guard stepped back, but the crowd began shouting again, demanding action. The leader studied the human carefully, then looked at her with something close to contempt. He asked why a human would care about the shame of their kind. The man didn't give a long answer. He said some things were simply wrong, no matter the species. The leader scoffed, saying humans had no place in their politics. But the human didn't step away. His gaze didn't waver, even as tension rippled through the crowd. She could feel the air tightening, the weight of hundreds of eyes fixed on them. Somewhere deep inside her, a spark of defiance flared to life again. Without warning, the leader ordered the chains removed. The crowd gasped, not expecting such a turn. The guards hesitated, but obeyed. Metal links fell from her wrists and clattered onto the dusty street. She rubbed her sore skin, the faint marks left behind stinging in the heat. The leader told the human that if he wanted her free, she was his responsibility now. His voice carried a warning that this was no act of mercy. The human didn't flinch at the terms. The crowd's noise returned, but now it was mixed with confusion. Some shouted in protest, demanding her punishment continue. Others whispered about the human's nerve, wondering how long he would last. She stood still, the broken chains at her feet, her arms heavy and aching from days of restraint. The heat pressed down, but for the first time since her capture, the air felt a little lighter. The human stepped closer, speaking quietly so only she could hear. He told her to walk with him. She hesitated, her sharp green eyes flicking from the guards to the crowd. Trust was a dangerous thing, and she had learned not to give it easily. Yet his tone held no command, only a steady assurance that he would not leave her behind. Slowly, she began to move. They walked side by side through the hostile street. Every step was watched, every motion judged. People threw small bits of dried leaves or muttered insults, but no one dared step into their path. The human's presence was like a shield, not because he looked dangerous, but because he moved with a confidence that dared challenge anyone to try. She kept her chin high, forcing herself not to look beaten. The guards followed at a distance, their orders unclear. The leader seemed content to watch them leave, perhaps knowing that whatever happened next would not be his responsibility. The Human led her toward the edge of the market, where the crowd began to thin. She could feel the weight of their stares fading with each step, replaced by the sound of her own heartbeat. The farther they went, the more she realized how badly her legs trembled. When they reached a quieter street, the human stopped. He studied her face, taking in the tiredness beneath her defiance. He asked if she could walk farther or if she needed to rest. She told him she could keep moving, but her voice was rough, unused after days of silence. He nodded and said they should find somewhere safer before the guards changed their minds. She wondered if safety even existed for someone like her anymore. They passed shuttered windows and empty stalls. The city had once been full of life, but war had carved its scars deep. She remembered when this district was a place of trade and music. Now it was a place where enemies were paraded for all to see. She glanced at the man beside her, trying to understand why he had stepped in. His face gave nothing away, but there was something in his eyes that didn't match the coldness of this place. Finally, they stopped near a narrow alley where the noise of the market was distant. He leaned against a wall and crossed his arms, asking her what she had done to earn such public hatred. She told him the truth in short, measured words. Her command had failed. The enemy had broken through, and her own people had needed someone to blame. The council had chosen her, stripping her of rank and parading her in chains to prove they were still in control. The human listened, without interrupting. When she finished, he asked if she had been betrayed. She thought about it for a long moment before answering. Yes, she said, but not by everyone. Some of her soldiers had tried to defend her, but their voices had been silenced. The rest had been too afraid to speak. He nodded, as if this confirmed something he already knew. Then he asked her what she planned to do next. She didn't have an answer. For so long, her future had been shaped by orders, by the path her rank demanded. Now there was only uncertainty. She told him she had no plan, no allies, and no home to return to. He studied her for a moment, then said that maybe it was time to make a new plan. She frowned, asking why a human would care about the fate of someone like her. His reply was simple, almost too simple, yet it left her silent. Because it's the right thing to do. The alley felt cooler than the market, the high walls casting deep shadows. She leaned lightly against the rough stone, her arms still aching from the weight of the chains. The human stayed a short distance away, his eyes scanning the street for any sign of pursuit. The silence between them was not empty. It carried the weight of everything that had just happened, and neither seemed in a hurry to break it. He finally spoke, asking if she trusted him yet. She gave him a sharp look, her lips pressing together before she answered. Trust was a luxury she could not afford, not after being betrayed by those she had once called allies. Still, she admitted he had done more for her in minutes than her people had done in weeks. His expression didn't change, but she thought she saw the smallest shift in his eyes, as if her words meant more than he would show. They began walking again, heading toward the city's outer district. The roads here were cracked and overgrown. In places, a sign of neglect. She noticed that the few faces they passed looked away quickly, unwilling to risk being caught watching them. The human moved with steady purpose, as if he already knew where he was going. She followed, the echo of their footsteps bouncing off the narrow walls around them. When they reached a corner, he paused and pointed toward a low building with a faded sign. He explained that it belonged to a merchant who owed him a favor. It would not be much, but it would give them shelter for the night. She studied the building, then looked back the way they had come. The streets were empty now, but the memory of the hostile crowd still clung to her mind like smoke. She decided to follow him inside. The interior was dim, lit only by thin lines of sunlight that slipped through the gaps in the shutters. The merchant, a short alien with cautious eyes, greeted the human with a nod. When his gaze fell on her, it lingered for a moment too long. She could almost hear the questions in his mind, but he said nothing. The human explained they needed a safe room and some food. The merchant hesitated, then agreed, leading them toward the back. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed and a wooden table. She sat down slowly, her muscles sore from the long walk. The human placed a cup of water in front of her and told her to drink. She lifted it to her lips, feeling the coolness spread through her dry throat. It was the simplest thing, yet it felt like a gift after the days she had spent in chains. She set the cup down and thanked him quietly. He asked her what her next step would be. She hesitated, turning the question over in her mind. She had no weapons, no soldiers, and no plan. Yet the humiliation she had endured burned in her chest. Like fire, she told him she could not stay hidden forever. Sooner or later, she would have to face those who had destroyed her. He listened carefully, his expression calm but unreadable. The merchant returned with a plate of bread and dried meat. She ate slowly, her eyes still flicking toward the door every few moments. Old habits of caution were hard to break. The human didn't press her to speak. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, watching the small window. His silence was not cold. It was the silence of someone who understood the weight of the moment. She found it strange how safe that made her feel. When the meal was done, the human told her they would leave at first light. Staying too long in one place would invite trouble. She nodded, agreeing that the city was no longer safe for either of them. The merchant offered no farewell when they left his shop, only a brief glance that held a mixture of curiosity and unease. As they stepped back into the fading light of day, she felt the strange pull of a journey she had not chosen but could no longer avoid. The city gates loomed ahead, tall metal structures covered with rust and old battle marks. The guards posted there glanced at them, but didn't stop them. She kept her hood low, hiding her face from view. The human walked beside her with the same steady pace he had kept since they left the merchant's place. Every step away from the market felt like a thin layer of weight lifting from her shoulders. Once they were outside the city walls, the noise faded into a distant hum. The road ahead stretched into open land, scattered with dry grass and low hills. She inhaled deeply, feeling the stale air of the city replaced by the open wind. The human said nothing, letting her adjust to the change. His presence was constant, neither pressing her with questions nor leaving her in silence too long. After some time, he led her toward a small grove of trees by the roadside. It offered shade and a good view of the road behind them. He said they would stop here for a short rest before continuing. She sat on the ground, her back against one of the tree trunks, and looked up at the branches swaying in the wind. The freedom of movement still felt strange after so many days in chains. The human handed her a small pouch of dried fruit. She took it, eating slowly while watching him. He was scanning the horizon as if expecting trouble at any moment. She asked if he thought the guards would follow them. He replied that it was possible, but less likely the farther they got from the city. Still, he preferred to move cautiously. His carefulness made her wonder how many dangers he had survived before meeting her. They spoke little as the sun dipped. Lower, the light took on a golden hue, painting the grass and hills in warm tones. She found herself studying him again, noticing the way his eyes narrowed slightly when he was thinking. There was no arrogance in him, no demand for recognition. He simply moved forward, as if his path was defined by his own choices alone. That quiet strength unsettled her in a way she couldn't name. When they finally rose to continue, the air had cooled. The road turned toward a narrow pass between two rocky hills. She felt uneasy as they entered the shadowed path. The human must have sensed it too, because his hand hovered near the small weapon at his side. The sound of their footsteps echoed against the stone, and every rustle of loose rock made her tense. She had walked into many dangers before, but this felt different. Halfway through the pass, figures appeared from behind the rocks. 3 aliens stepped into view, their faces hidden by masks. They carried crude weapons and moved with the confidence of those who had done this many times before. The human stepped slightly ahead of her, his voice steady as he told them they wanted no trouble. The masked leader laughed, saying trouble had already found them. The attackers spread out, blocking both ends of the pass. She felt her pulse quicken, her mind calculating escape routes and failing to find one. The human didn't draw his weapon yet. Instead, he kept his eyes on the leader, studying his stance. She realized he was waiting for the right moment. The tension in the air felt sharp enough to cut. Every second stretched longer as the standoff continued. Then the leader lunged forward, swinging his weapon. The human moved faster than she thought possible, sidestepping and striking the man's arm with enough force to make him drop it. The second attacker rushed in, but the human caught him by the shoulder and drove him into the rock wall. The third hesitated, his confidence faltering. She watched in stunned silence as the human turned the fight in seconds without a single wasted motion. The last attacker backed away, dragging the others with him. They disappeared into the shadows without another word. The human straightened, breathing evenly as if he had done nothing more than walk a short distance. She stared at him, unsure what to say. Finally she managed to speak, her voice quiet but certain. She told him that she understood now why he had stepped into the crowd for her that day. Asterisk. The narrow pass fell silent after the attackers left. She stood still for a moment, her heart still pounding from the sudden fight. The human walked back to her, checking to see if she was hurt. She shook her head, saying she was fine. His eyes scanned the shadows one last time before he turned back toward the open road. They walked until the path opened into a wide plain. The moon was rising, casting silver light across the grass. The air was cool and still, carrying only the faint sound of insects. She stayed close to him, her mind replaying the way he had moved in the fight. It was not the strength alone that had impressed her. It was the control, the way he had ended it quickly without needless harm. After a while, they stopped near a cluster of large stones. He said they would rest here until morning. She sat down, leaning her back against the smooth surface of one stone. He built a small fire, the warm glow cutting through the night. She watched him work in silence, her thoughts drifting between gratitude and caution. Trust still came slowly, but it was growing stronger with each step they shared. When the fire was steady, he handed her a strip of dried meat. She took it, eating slowly while the warmth of the flames eased the tension in her muscles. He asked if she had ever thought about leaving her people behind completely. The question caught her off guard. She had always thought of herself as part of them, even when they turned on her. She told him she didn't know if she could walk away from everything she had been raised to defend. He listened, nodding once before saying that sometimes walking away was the only way to survive. She studied his face in the firelight. His features were calm but firm, like someone who had already lived through the choice he was describing. She wanted to ask him what he had left behind, but the way he stared into the fire made her keep the question to herself. The night deepened, and the firelight flickered across their faces. She found herself speaking more than she expected, telling him pieces of her life before the war. She spoke of the academy where she trained, the soldiers she led, and the pride she once felt wearing her commander's badge. His quiet attention made it easier to speak, as though her words were being stored rather than judged. For the first time in weeks, her voice did not feel heavy. When she fell silent, he told her about some of the places he had traveled. His stories were simple but painted clear pictures of deserts, frozen seas, and cities built on cliffs. She could hear the way he valued freedom in every word. It made her realize how small her own world had been, even before her fall from grace. She began to wonder if staying among her own kind had been limiting her far longer than she had known. The fire burned low, and the chill of night grew sharper. He added another piece of wood before lying back to rest. She remained sitting, her eyes scanning the horizon out of habit. The plain was quiet, but her mind was restless. Every path ahead of her was uncertain, yet she felt more prepared to face it now than she had before. His presence had become a steady point in the chaos of her life. Before closing his eyes, he told her they would reach a larger settlement by the next evening. There, they might find someone who could help them plan their next move. She agreed, though she knew danger would still follow her. As the fire crackled softly and the moonlight bathed the plain, she realized she was no longer thinking of herself as alone. That thought stayed with her as she finally closed her eyes to rest. The sun rose slowly over the plains, turning the horizon into bands of gold and red. She woke to the sound of the humans stirring the fire back to life. The air was cool, and the faint scent of smoke drifted between them. He handed her a small piece of bread, and they ate in silence while the world around them warmed. The quiet felt different now, no longer heavy but steady. When they began walking again, the road ahead curved toward distant hills. The human moved with his usual calm, his eyes scanning both the path ahead and the land behind them. She matched his pace, her steps growing stronger with each mile. The memories of the market still haunted her, but they no longer defined her every thought. Something in her had shifted since that day, though she could not yet name it. By midday, the shape of a settlement came into view. It was larger than the city they had left, with wide roads and tall structures made of pale stone. Smoke curled from chimneys and the hum of activity carried on the wind. She felt a twinge of unease, knowing that strangers might recognize her. The human noticed her hesitation and told her they would keep to the less crowded areas. She gave a small nod, trusting his judgment. As they entered the settlement, the streets buzzed with merchants, workers, and children running between stalls. The human led her down a quieter lane where the sound of voices was softer. He stopped outside a modest building with a faded sign. Inside, an older alien with gentle eyes greeted him warmly. They spoke briefly before the human gestured for her to join them. She stepped inside, scanning the room for any sign of danger. The older alien introduced himself as a friend of the humans. His voice carried a calm weight, the kind that belonged to someone who had seen much and survived it. He offered them food and a place to rest. She accepted the offer carefully, still wary of kindness after all she had endured. The human seemed at ease here, which made it easier for her to relax. If only slightly. Over the meal, the human explained why they had come. They needed information about the council that had ordered her public humiliation. The older alien listened closely, then leaned forward to speak. He said the council's power had grown sharper in recent years, silencing dissent and rewarding loyalty without question. Those who defied them were erased from records or made into examples. She knew his words were true because she had lived them. The older alien also mentioned whispers of a growing resistance. Small groups scattered across different cities, united by a shared desire to end the council's rule. He said they lacked a strong leader, someone who could rally them into more than scattered voices. She felt the weight of his gaze as he spoke, as if he was testing her reaction. She did not respond immediately, unsure if she was ready to carry that kind of burden. When the meal ended, the human asked if they could speak to one of these resistance contacts. The older alien hesitated, then agreed, saying it would be risky but possible. He left for a short while and returned with a set of directions to a meeting place outside the settlement. The human folded the paper and slipped it into his jacket. She could feel the air between them tighten with the knowledge that their path was about to grow more dangerous. Before they left, the older alien placed a small blade in her hand. It was simple but well-balanced, its edge sharp. He told her it had belonged to someone who once fought for the same cause. She closed her fingers around the hilt, feeling a strange mixture of gratitude and responsibility. For the first time since her fall, she held a weapon again. It felt like a piece of herself had been returned. They left the settlement before sunset, following the directions the older alien had given them. The path led through open fields before narrowing into a trail between tall ridges. The human walked ahead, scanning the terrain for threats. She followed close behind, her hand resting on the small blade at her side. The air carried the quiet tension of an unspoken purpose. The meeting place was a hollow between the ridges, hidden from the road. A small fire burned at its center, and 3 figures stood near it. They turned when the human and the alien woman approached. The leader, a tall alien with a scar across his cheek, greeted them cautiously. He asked why they had come. The human answered plainly, saying they were looking for allies against the council. The leader studied her for a long moment. Recognition flickered in his eyes, and his expression tightened. He said her name softly, as if it carried weight. She kept her gaze steady, telling him she knew the risks of showing her face. The leader asked if she had come to hide or to fight. Her answer was simple. She had come to fight. They spoke deep into the night, sharing what they knew about the council's movements. The leader revealed that several cities were already stirring with unrest. Small strikes and acts of defiance had weakened the council's hold in some places. But without someone to unite them, the movement would fade. She listened carefully, her mind mapping the possibilities. The human said she had the experience to lead. She felt the truth in his words, but also the weight of them. The leader asked why a human would care about their cause. The human replied that freedom mattered beyond species or borders. His voice carried a conviction that silenced the fire's crackle for a moment. She glanced at him, realizing that his belief was not born from duty, but from choice. That kind of loyalty could not be commanded. It had to be earned. By dawn they had agreed on their first step. They would target one of the council's supply convoys, passing through the northern pass in 2 days. Cutting it off would send a message and supply the resistance with much-needed resources. She volunteered to lead the strike. The leader nodded, warning that failure would bring heavy retaliation. She accepted the risk without hesitation. They spent the day preparing. The human helped her plan the ambush, marking the terrain and identifying choke points. The resistance fighters gathered weapons, checked gear, and moved quietly to avoid drawing attention. She felt the old rhythm of command return to her voice as she gave instructions. For the first time since her capture, she felt like herself. Again, when the day of the ambush came, they were in position before sunrise. The road through the pass was narrow, flanked by steep cliffs. She crouched behind a ridge, watching the dust of the convoy grow nearer. The human was beside her, ready to move at her signal. Every heartbeat seemed to echo in her ears. She tightened her grip on the blade, feeling the cold steel steady her focus. The convoy entered the trap. Resistance fighters blocked the rear while she and the human charged from the front. The first guard went down before he could raise the alarm. The human disarmed another with swift precision. The fight was brief but decisive. Within minutes, the convoy was theirs. Supplies were secured, and the survivors were sent away with a warning to carry back to the council. As the fighters cheered, she stood still, breathing in the sharp morning air. This victory was small compared to the battle she had once led, but it was different. It was hers, one alongside those who chose to fight, not because they were ordered to, but because they believed it was right. She looked at the human, and he gave her a small nod. No words were needed to understand the bond forged between them.